This is Dave with Taboo Customs. This video today, we're going to be replacing a unit bearing, or you might know it as a wheel bearing, on a 98 TJ. So let's take a look. This is our 98 TJ here, and we have this TJ really for us just to test fit products around the shop, and then eventually we are going to do a project on this that we'll do some videos on. In the past, we bought this with a blown 4-liter in it, and we put another 4-liter in it, so from that point it's pretty good, but we hadn't gone through the rest of it, so I didn't really know much about this Jeep, even pulled it in today. So today I pulled it in, and I was working on testing something on a control arm, and I went to move the wheel, and it moved a little bit like it shouldn't. So what happens with these unit bearings, and this is actually what we're talking about right here. So here's your axle shaft, goes through this. Here is the unit bearing. So this is actually what is pressed into the knuckle and then bolted from the back, and then you've got your flange up here that your wheel bolts to. So obviously with running larger tires, heavier tires, lifting the Jeep, you put a lot more stress on these than what you might have in a stock situation. So a lot of times you'll see these go out both in TJs and in Cherokees. And usually what you want to do is when you jack up your Jeep, you'll want to see if it moves very much at all. If it moves any more than eighth inch, or what. I mean, honestly, almost every TJ that I've jacked up is going to have just a hair of movement. But if it moves like this, it's definitely bad. Let's take a look at the other side. The other side isn't quite as bad as this, but it's also bad, and we'll show you how much that one moves. Alright, so here we are on the driver's side now, and the same thing. If you take this and you move it, so you can see it moves a whole lot less, but really it moves too much for us to be comfortable with. It's moving probably up here at the top a good ½ inch back and forth, so that means that unit bearing is worn out in there. So the big issues with that, when they wear out, we have had people that their bearings have broke and completely came off and end up smashing into the tub. So you want to avoid that, obviously, and you'll also see drivability issues because it'll cause issues with steering, and who knows, we really haven't drove this Jeep on the road, so we didn't notice until we pulled it in here. But let's take a look at how to remove that, and then we'll install some new ones. So as you just saw, our driver's side wheel was moving a good ½ inch or roughly at the top of the wheel. Now you have to be careful about this. We were just saying that we were blaming the wheel hub, the unit bearing here. However, in coming over here and actually replacing it, we're finding that it's actually a little bit different story. The movement there can actually be an indication of two different issues. One can be the wheel hub here. The other issue though can be your ball joints. And what we notice actually after we replace this unit here is that our issue is actually a ball joint issue. And I don't know if you can see that or not, but the ball joint itself, the knuckle here, actually moves about an ½ inch back and forth. And so that's actually what is causing that wheel to be able to be tilted in and out. So if you are able to tilt your wheel in and out, you're going to want to raise your Jeep. Have someone move the wheel while you're looking at it so you can see exactly what the issue is. Obviously, we already replaced the wheel hub. We're going to go ahead and leave it that way. However, we know now that we're going to have to do a set of ball joints in this Jeep here pretty soon, probably before we're able to drive it. So obviously the first thing we're going to have to do is jack the Jeep up, support the axle with the jack stand, and then we'll need to remove the tire. So the next step is we're going to need to remove the caliper and then the rotor. So for the caliper, there will be 2 bolts on the back here, and they look like they're 12 millimeter bolts. Once we get that unbolted, what we're going to do is we're going to use some wire. We're actually going to wire that caliper up here to the spring so it's out of the way and it's not trying to fall on us or put any unneeded pressure on this brake hose here. And then we can pull that rotor off. So now we can show you again just how bad this unit bearing is. This is the piece back here that's bolted to the hub, and then here's the hub that, bolted to the knuckle. Here's the hub that's that the wheel rides on, and you can see that as we move this up and down, in and out, you know, this piece is not moving. So these bolts aren't loose or anything. It's just the bearings inside this unit bearing are completely gone. So the next step we'll need to do is we'll need to take the nut off the outside of the axle shaft. So we'll have to remove the cotter pin, the lock washer, and then also the nut underneath. So this nut here, from what we can tell, is a 36 millimeter, so it's a pretty big nut. Now one of the things that we'll do, if this nut doesn't want to come off very easily, let's say it's wanting to spin the axle and we have to use a breaker bar, we will take a piece of small bar, put it inside the yokes on the axle shaft, and then let it lock, spin it until it locks against the bottom of the C for the knuckle. That way it'll hold that shaft in place so that we can break it loose. Then underneath there you should also have a washer that you'll have to fish out. And chances are, like me, you might have to go get a pick and pull that washer out. One thing we didn't mention on this when we pulled that nut off is that you do have the option to go ahead and pull this whole assembly off with the axle shaft or unbolt the axle shaft here. We typically find it easier to unbolt the axle shaft here because if, like you saw earlier in our video, we have an axle shaft with the unit bearing on it, you know, trying to put that in a vise is not very easy because if that doesn't come off very easy, it really can be a pain. So it's a lot easier to take this nut off with it on the Jeep. So the next step is we'll need to unbolt the unit bearing itself from the knuckle. The unit bearing will have 3 main bolts on the back here that go through the knuckle, and these are kind of odd bolts. They are a 12-point bolt, so you're going to need to make sure that you have a 13 millimeter socket that is 12 point. You don't want to try to use something else because if you screw these bolts up, you're going to be in a world of hurt trying to get them out. Now, when you go to pull these bolts out, you're going to want to turn the knuckle so that you can reach the front bolt here once you turn it to the right since we're on the passenger side, and then you can turn it to the left to get the other 2 bolts. Now that the unit bearing is unbolted from the knuckle, we can start to pull it out from the knuckle. Now, if we were trying to reuse this unit bearing, of course, we have to be a little bit gentle with it. I would not be hitting the unit bearing on the hub here because we don't want to try to mess up the bearings. What we would then do is use a screwdriver and a chisel, and there's a couple of slots in the dust shield back here that you can start trying to basically pull that the unit bearing out of the hub, because it is kind of a press fit, excuse me, into the knuckle here. So but we don't have to worry about this because, well, this one's shot. So all we need is our hammer, and we will probably use a chisel once we get kind of close and try to get it loose. Okay, well, so much for that. You can see how bad it was, and essentially that's what could have happened, you know, after a short period of time driving this Jeep like that. This hub here would have basically just popped out, came off with the wheel, the axle shaft, whatever, and probably broke and then went up into the fender well. So now we're back to taking our screwdriver, our chisel, and then chiseling back here. Now chances are you're going to kind of mess up, but don't worry about that too much. Once you get it off, you can kind of straighten it out. I mean, it's just a dust shield. If we do mar up the surface on the back side, we will end up having to clean that up though. There you have it. That is the unit bearing removed. So now we'll talk about installing the new unit bearing. Alright, so we've got our new unit bearing, wheel hub, whatever you want to call it here, but before we start installing that, what we need to do is clean up this surface here, because chances are, and it did, whenever we removed the original, we deformed this surface a little bit, so there's a couple of raised spots on it. So we're just going to take a little die grinder, clean up those areas a little bit. Just make sure that that surface is as flat as it can be. And then you're going to need your dust shield, which will go on with the recessed portion going in towards the Jeep. And you can use a couple of the bolts to help to hold that in place. Just going to want to move on you as you put everything together. And we can start putting the 3 rear bolts. Get them all 3 started. And once you have all 3 of them started, you're going to want to alternate which one you're tightening down, because you want to pull that in pretty straight, because that is somewhat of a press fit inside that knuckle. If you don't pull it in straight, you're going to have some problems if it gets cockeyed in there. So what we'll do is we'll tighten those down, and then we will torque these down back here to 75 foot-pounds. Okay. Now that we've got that installed, we'll need to reinstall our washer, our nut, our lock washer, and then our cotter pin. Now when we go to install this will actually get torqued to 175 foot-pounds. So obviously when we go to do that, we're going to have to put something inside of here to keep the axle shaft from turning, so we can get to that torque. Alright, so we've got the new wheel hub all installed. You might be ready with some new cotter pins for this because, like you saw, we started putting the other one in. Didn't want to go in very well, so we just grabbed a new one. So you might have a couple of new cotter pins laying around if you get ready to do this, because it does not come with the wheel hub. So now all we need to do is reinstall our rotor, reinstall our caliper, and we can put our wheel back on. But first, what we're going to do is we're actually going to clean up the rotor a little bit. We're going to take some of the rust off this edge so that our caliper and our pads will slide over it easier. We'll also need to take a C-clamp and clamp this caliper a little bit to push the piston back into the caliper so that we're able to put that back on. Now for installing the caliper, you're going to want to make sure you push these pins here all the way back. You probably also want to check them. Now we're probably going to end up replacing this caliper pretty quick, or at least the slide pins in it, because we can tell here we've got a slide pin here that's already going bad, so we'll eventually replace that, but we'll probably do it once we start working more on this Jeep in the future. Right now I'm just trying to get it so we can move it around the shop here. So you put the bottom in the slot, and then the top will basically slide into place, and that's where you got to make sure that those pins are pulled back, or else they're going to hit the areas that they actually bolt to. And we'll put our new our bolts in, and we'll get those tightened back down. Alright, so that pretty much does it for the reinstalled wheel hub assembly here, the unit bearing. So if you have any questions about this, you feel free to get a hold of us. You can go to our website and contact us at taboocustoms.com. And obviously, thank you for watching, and if this video has helped you, like or subscribe is always appreciated. Thanks.